The first thing Merivyn Aldercroft noticed was that he was bleeding, and the second was that no one in the entire ballroom seemed to care. The Duke of Halverthorne stood with his back to a marble pillar, a glass of untouched champagne in his left hand, and his right hand pressed flat against his ribs beneath his coat. From a distance, anyone watching might have thought he was simply standing apart, as the Duke of Halverthorne always stood apart, observing the dancers with that flat, gray expression that had earned him every cruel name London had ever invented for him. The Iceman of Berkeley Square. The Marble Duke. The coldest man in London. But Merivyn was not at a distance. She was passing behind the pillar on her way to the retiring room, and she saw the slow, dark spread of red beginning to seep through his shirt cuff. She stopped. She had been trying all evening to remain invisible, drifting along the edges of the ball. She had succeeded so well that 3 different gentlemen had walked through the space she occupied as if she were not there at all. Until now. "Your Grace." The words came out before she could stop them. Quiet. Not a question. Not a summons. Just an acknowledgement. The Duke turned his head perhaps half an inch. His eyes, when they settled on her face, were the color of a winter sea before a storm. "Madam, I do not believe we have been introduced, and I do not intend to remedy that. Move along." 6 years ago, when she was 18, those words would have ruined her. But Merivyn Aldercroft was 24 now, and she had been ignored, dismissed, and walked through by enough men to recognize the particular shape of cruelty that came from pain rather than malice. She stepped closer. "You are bleeding," she said. His expression did not change, only the faintest tightening at the corner of his mouth, so small she would have missed it if she had not been watching for it. "You are mistaken. I am not. Your cuff is staining. If you continue to stand there for another quarter hour, half the room will see it, and the other half will hear of it before the carriages are called." For one long moment, the coldest Duke in London looked at her as though she had spoken in a language he had never been taught. Then his jaw set. "You will move along, madam, or I shall summon a footman to escort you. Please." The word fell between them like a single drop of rain on dry stone. She did not know why she said it. She did not know him. She had only ever seen him from across rooms, the way everyone in London saw him, a tall, unmoving figure who never danced, who had buried a brother 5 years ago and a father 2 years ago, and who had not, by any account, spoken a kind word to a single living soul since. "Please, let me help you. I know somewhere quiet. No one will see." His eyes searched her face. After another long moment, he gave a single, almost invisible nod. "Lead, then. Quickly." She led him out of the ballroom by the side door used by the servants, down a narrow passage that smelled of beeswax, through a green baize door, and into a small, disused sitting room. She closed the door and turned the key. The Duke stood in the center of the room with one hand pressed to his side. The candle she had lit threw long shadows across his face, and for the first time, she saw what the ballroom had not shown her. He was very pale. There was sweat at his temple. The gray in his eyes was not coldness. It was the gray of a man who had been holding himself upright by sheer force of will for longer than was possible. "Sit down," she said. "I do not require." "Sit down, Your Grace." She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. He sat. "You will tell me what happened, and then you will tell me whether I may unbutton your coat, because I cannot help you while you are bleeding into it. You should not be here. If anyone discovers, then we shall both hope no one discovers. Your coat, please." He lifted his hand from his side. The white of his shirt beneath was no longer white. Merivyn did not allow her face to change. She had 3 younger brothers, who had between them broken 9 bones. Blood did not frighten her. The look in the Duke's eyes when she carefully unfastened the buttons of his coat, however, very nearly did. He was watching her with the look of a man who had not been touched gently by anyone in a very long time, and who did not know what to do with the fact of it. It was a knife, was it not? A blade of some description. I did not stop to examine it. A man came at me from behind a carriage as I was arriving. I was, as it happens, faster than he was. The wound was not as deep as she had feared. A long, shallow cut along the lower ribs, ugly but not dangerous. She tore a strip from the inner hem of her petticoat and pressed it firmly against the cut. Why did you not call for a physician? Because every gossip in London would have known of it before midnight, and whoever sent the man with the blade would know he had succeeded in shaking me. I do not intend to give him that satisfaction. So you intended to bleed quietly through a quadrille and walk to your carriage. That was the plan. It was a very bad plan. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was the plan I had. She bound the strip of petticoat tightly around his ribs. The silence between them was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of 2 people who had unexpectedly found themselves on the same side of a closed door. "Who are you?" he said. "And why are you helping me?" "My name is Marvin Aldercroft. My father was Sir Tobias Aldercroft of Wensley Park. He died 4 years ago. I am presently the unwanted houseguest of my stepmother in Cavendish Square. I am helping you because you were bleeding, and no one else had noticed, and because I have spent 6 years being the person no one notices, and I find I don't have the heart to do to anyone else what so many have done to me." He said nothing for a long moment. Lord Corvin Halverthorne. Theodoric, to the very few who once had cause to use it. She had not asked for his name. He had given it anyway, and he had given the smaller, softer one beneath, which no one in London had spoken aloud in 5 years. A bell rang. Supper. He rose carefully. His coat, when he drew it back across his ribs, hid the worst of the damage. "Miss Aldercroft, I am in your debt." "You are not. You are merely no longer bleeding." He looked at her for a long moment. "Tell no one. I would not dream of it." He inclined his head, the smallest possible bow, and crossed to the door. His hand was on the key when he stopped. "You said please." "I did. No one says please to me." "That is perhaps why you bleed alone." The Duke stood with his hand on the key, his back to her. The line of his shoulders did not move at all, as though he had stopped breathing. Then he turned the key, and he was gone. Marvin sat back on her heels in the empty sitting room, looking at the dark stain of his blood on the floorboards, and she understood that something had just happened to her which she did not yet have words for. She did not know that across the city, in the library of a house in Berkeley Square, the Duke of Halverthorne would stand in front of his cold hearth at 3 in the morning, with his hand pressed to a freshly bandaged side, and he would say a single word aloud to the empty room. The word was, "Please," and it would be the first word he had spoken aloud to himself in 5 years. The letter arrived at 9:30 the following morning, and Marvin knew it was trouble before she broke the seal. It came on heavy cream paper, sealed in black wax. Lady Aldercroft, hovering at her elbow, recognized the crest. She inhaled so sharply that the lace at her throat fluttered. "Halverthorne. That is the seal of the Duke of Halverthorne. Why are you receiving correspondence from the Duke of Halverthorne?" "I am sure I do not know," Marvin said, which was the first lie she had told her stepmother in 3 years, and which came easily. She broke the seal. "Miss Aldercroft, I find I have a matter to put to you which cannot be entrusted to paper. If you would do me the courtesy of receiving me at 3 this afternoon, I shall present myself at Cavendish Square. The matter concerns a debt I owe, and a difficulty I require assistance in resolving. The difficulty is not to my reputation but to yours, Halverthorne." She read it twice. "Well, speak, child." "The Duke of Halverthorne has requested permission to call this afternoon." The silence in the breakfast room was so complete that she could hear the cook somewhere below scolding the scullery maid. "The Duke of Halverthorne is calling. On you. Here." So, it would appear. Did something happen at the Pemberley ball last night? Nothing of which I am aware. It was the second lie, and it came even more easily than the first. You will receive him in the green drawing room. You will wear the gray silk. You will say nothing foolish. Of course. She did not, of course, intend to do any of these things. The surest way to manage her stepmother was to agree completely and proceed exactly as she had originally intended. At 3 o'clock, the bell rang. "His Grace, the Duke of Halverthorne," said the butler. The Duke entered. He wore black. He moved with a stiffness in his left side that no one who had not bandaged him the night before would have noticed. He bowed precisely, a degree shallower than custom required, and Merivyn understood at once that he was furious. "Miss Aldercroft!" "Your Grace, you will excuse my directness. We have very little time." "Time for what?" "For deciding whether you and I are about to be ruined together or whether we are about to be married." She sat down. Her knees simply elected, on their own behalf, to no longer sustain her. "I beg your pardon. You were seen, Miss Aldercroft, last night, leaving the ballroom by the servants' door at 10:15. You were seen returning by the same door at past, alone, with what an observant housemaid took the trouble to describe as fresh blood upon your sleeve. The housemaid mentioned it in the servants' hall this morning. She has a sister who is presently lady's maid to the Honorable Mrs. Trentham, the most efficient gossip in 3 counties. The story will be in every drawing room in London by the time the lamps are lit this evening. Then we shall say I cut my finger. The story has already specified that the blood was upon your cuff and your hem, and that you were absent from the ballroom for nearly 30 minutes. The story will, by morning, have you compromised by some footman, or, more entertainingly, by myself. As I was observed leaving the ballroom by a different door at 10:15 and not seen again until supper, the latter version is the one that will travel. They will say I was with you. They will say it before nightfall." She closed her eyes. "Your Grace, I did not mean to. I know what you did. You stopped me from bleeding to death in a public room, and now I shall, if I do not act with great decision, repay you by destroying every prospect of marriage, employment, and welcome in this city you possess, which I am not prepared to do." She opened her eyes. "What are you proposing?" "A betrothal. You will accept my offer of marriage today. The announcement will be in the morning papers. The story of the blood, when it arrives in drawing rooms this evening, will be neutralized by the fact that you were already, by then, my affianced wife. The betrothal will be of indefinite length. We shall not, in fact, marry. After a sufficient interval, perhaps 6 months, you will privately end the engagement on the grounds of incompatibility. Your reputation will be intact. Mine will weather a broken engagement easily enough. You want me to pretend to be engaged to you for 6 months, or however long is necessary, and in exchange, I will settle upon you, by separate deed of trust, a sum sufficient to remove you permanently from your stepmother's house, and to permit you to live independently for the remainder of your life. This is non-negotiable." Merivyn could not speak. For a long moment she could only look at him, at this remote and bleeding and impossible man, who had walked into her stepmother's drawing room and offered her the first, true freedom of her adult life. Why? Why would you do this? His gray eyes did not move from her face. Because last night you said please, and because no one has said it to me in 5 years, and because I find I am not yet so dead inside that I am willing to allow the woman who said it to be destroyed for it. If it is insufficient, you may refuse, and I shall accept your refusal. She felt something inside her ribs go very still. And if I accept, then I shall go directly from this house to the offices of the Morning Post. My stepmother. Your stepmother will not, I think, be an obstacle. No, she will not. She drew in a long, slow breath. She thought of her father, of the green hills of Wensley Park, of the 6 years she had spent being walked through. She thought of the word, please. Yes, I accept. The Duke inclined his head. Then we are betrothed, Miss Aldercroft. It would seem so, Your Grace. I shall return tomorrow at 11. Whoever sent the man with the blade last night will, when he reads the morning papers, have a very particular interest in the woman I have chosen to marry. You are saying I am in danger. I am saying you have stepped into a room you did not know was burning, and I have just locked the door behind you, and I am sorry for it. He bowed. He left. The door closed. Marivin sat in her stepmother's green drawing room and understood that the trap had closed just now, and she had walked into it open-eyed, and she did not regret a single step. Above stairs, her stepmother was already shrieking for the butler. The announcement appeared in the Morning Post at 6 the following morning, and by 9:30, the knocker on the house in Cavendish Square had been struck so many times that the butler had stopped answering it. Marivin had not slept. Sometime around 4 she had begun to laugh, very quietly, into her own hands, and she had not been entirely certain whether she was laughing or weeping. At 11 precisely, the Duke arrived. Lady Aldercroft, who had spent the morning oscillating between triumph and terror, presented herself with the grandeur of a woman accepting the surrender of a small nation. The Duke bowed to her with the precise depth required by her rank, and not 1 degree more. Lady Aldercroft, I have come to discuss arrangements with my affianced wife. I shall require the use of this room for 1 hour, privately. Your Grace, I should be most happy. Privately, madam. It was simply the voice of a man who had spent his entire life being obeyed. Lady Aldercroft made a sound somewhere between a curtsy and a stammer, and withdrew. Marivin turned to face him. He looked even worse than yesterday. The gray beneath his eyes had deepened. You did not sleep. I did not. Did you? No. Sit, Miss Aldercroft. She sat. He stood with his back to the cold hearth. There are 3 things you must understand. The first, the man who attacked me at the Pemberley ball was not a thief. He was sent. I have my suspicions, and my suspicions involve a man named Ashbel Crane, who was my younger brother's closest friend at Cambridge, and who, since my brother's death 5 years ago, has made it his particular project to ensure that the dukedom of Halverthorne does not pass to me intact. He has spent 5 years circulating rumors, manufacturing debts, and most recently, paying men with knives. You are now publicly attached to my name, which means he will, within a matter of days, make you a target. What does he want? He wants me ruined, dispossessed, dead, or some combination of the 3. He will not attempt your life. He will attempt your reputation, your nerves, and your standing. The second thing, I am, by every account in this city, an extremely unpleasant man. I have not been kind to anyone in 5 years. I keep a very cold house. I do not, under any circumstances, discuss my brother. I will not pretend, Miss Aldercroft, to be a different man for the convenience of our charade. And the third thing." He was silent for a long moment. "I know who you are. 3 years ago, you wrote a pamphlet, anonymously, on the subject of poorhouse reform. The pamphlet was vigorous, factually unimpeachable, and so politically inconvenient to a certain member of Parliament that he attempted to have its author prosecuted. He failed because the author had taken the precaution of routing the pamphlet through 3 printers and signing it with no name. I am acquainted with the second of those printers. I asked him who had written the thing. I have known your name for 3 years. She could not breathe. Why? Why did you never speak to me? Because I had not the smallest intention of marrying anyone, and because a young woman who could write that pamphlet did not deserve the attentions of a man who had nothing to offer her but a closed house and a cold bed. So I left you alone. And then, 2 nights ago, you said please, and you helped me anyway. And I have spent every hour since asking myself what kind of man I have been, that the first person to show me kindness in 5 years was a stranger whose name I had been hoarding like a miser. Hoards gold. The room was very still. Your Grace, I am not finished. No, but I am asking you to stop. He stopped. She rose. She walked to the window. She looked at the carriages passing in the square until she trusted her voice. You knew. 3 years. Yes. Do you have any idea what it is to be invisible for 6 years? To stand in rooms and be walked through? To be told by your own stepmother that the kindest thing you can do is stop reminding the world that you exist? I think I do, Miss Aldercroft, though my invisibility was of my own making, and yours was not. 3 years. You read my pamphlet. You knew my name. You decided I deserved to be left alone for my own good. You decided, without asking me. You sat in your cold house, and you decided that I should be spared the indignity of a cold husband. And meanwhile, I sat in my stepmother's house, and learned every year a little more thoroughly that I was a thing the world did not want. Do you understand that your kindness, your 3 years of considerate silence, was indistinguishable from every other dismissal I have ever received? He did not answer. She turned to look at him. Whatever had been behind his eyes had cracked. Yes, I understand. I will keep our bargain. I will be your affianced wife in the eyes of London for as long as is necessary. I will let you settle the deed of trust. But you will not, in the months ahead, mistake my civility for affection. You did not spare me. You ignored me. They are not the same thing. The silence that followed was the silence of a struck bell. He inclined his head, very slowly. You are correct. I know. Miss Aldercroft, may I sit? She nodded. He sat. He looked, in the morning light, very nearly his age, and not the figure of cold marble that London had made of him. This evening there is a small private dinner at the house of the Earl of Senec. Crane will be there. I should like, with your permission, to present you to him. I should like him to understand from the moment he sees you that you are not, in any sense in which he is accustomed to operating, alone. I do not object. The carriage will call for you at 7. He rose. He bowed. He moved toward the door, and her voice stopped him. The pamphlet. Did you find it persuasive? He stood for a long moment with his back to her. I found it the most persuasive document I had read in a decade. I had 3 of my own parishes reformed on its recommendations within the year. I never told you. I told no one. I should have told you. I am telling you now. The door closed behind him. Marivin stood alone with her hand pressed flat against the cold pane of the window, and she discovered that she was, after all, weeping. The Earl of Senec kept a townhouse in Grosvenor Square that had been built by his grandfather to intimidate guests. The dining room, when Marivin entered it on the arm of the Duke at 7:30, was lit by 200 candles and paneled in walnut so dark it seemed to absorb the light. There were 16 people already assembled, 16 pairs of eyes turned, as one, to the door. "Courage, Miss Aldercroft," the Duke murmured. "They will not bite while I am beside you. And if you are not beside me, then you will bite first. I have it on good authority that you are quite capable. Halverthorne, Miss Aldercroft, we are honored. Seneck, permit me to present my affianced wife. Indeed, London has spoken of little else since the morning papers. I imagine. Where is Crane?" The Earl's smile flickered. Mr. Crane sent his regrets at 6:30, a sudden indisposition. The Duke's hand, where it lay beneath Marivin's on his sleeve, did not move, but she felt the muscle along his forearm go taut as a drawn wire. How disappointing. Pray convey my wishes for his swift recovery. They went in to dinner. She was seated at the Duke's right hand. To her own right sat Lord Garrick Westover, a thin, elegant man of 40. "My felicitations, Miss Aldercroft. It is a remarkable engagement. One hears such varied accounts. Some say it is the romance of the decade. Others, less generous, hint that there is some quieter explanation." She lifted her wine-glass and looked at him over its rim. "Lord Westover, if you are about to ask me whether I was compromised by His Grace at the Pemberley ball, I should advise you to consider very carefully whether you wish to spend the rest of this dinner sitting beside a woman who has been compromised by the Duke of Halverthorne." There was a small choking sound from her left. The Duke had, very precisely, set down his soup spoon. Lord Westover laughed. It was not a comfortable laugh. "Miss Aldercroft, you are formidable. I'm tired, my lord. There is a difference. Pass me the salt, if you would." He passed the salt, the Duke murmured, in a voice pitched only for her ear. That was extraordinary. It was rude. It was extraordinary. I am a great many things this evening. Displeased is not among them. She looked away before her face could betray her. She had armored herself against 100 kinds of cruelty. She had not armored herself against approval. The footman entered at the end of the fish course, bearing a small silver salver. "Beg pardon, Your Grace. A note has been delivered for Miss Aldercroft. The bearer says it is most particular." The room dropped to a single attentive hush. "Who is the bearer?" "A boy, Your Grace, from the street. He gave no name. He said the note must be placed in Miss Aldercroft's hand." "Then place it in my hand instead." The footman set the salver before the Duke. He lifted the folded paper, turned it in his fingers, without breaking the seal, and set it down beside his wine-glass. He addressed his next remark to the Earl's wife. "Lady Seneck, you were saying, the cypresses at the Villa d'Este." Yes, the cypresses." The conversation, with great difficulty, resumed. Marivin did not eat. The note lay beside the Duke's wine-glass like a small folded hand. She understood that the Duke wasn't going to give it to her precisely because he already knew, without opening it, who it was from. She waited until the next course was being laid. Then, beneath the cover of the table, she reached across and took the note. The Duke's hand closed over hers. "Not here. I beg you. Whatever it says, it is calculated to wound you in the most public room in London. I shall give it to you in private." She did not move her hand. "You said please." "I did." She let go of the note. The remainder of the dinner passed in a haze. Once, the young Lady Stanwick opposite leaned across the table and said in a tone of bright artificial sympathy, "Miss Aldercroft, you must be quite overwhelmed by the suddenness of all this." And Marivin heard herself reply, "Quite well, thank you." The suddenness of one's good fortune is rarely a complaint that excites general sympathy. I shall endeavor to bear it. There was a small ripple of uncertain laughter, and Lady Stanwix subsided. The Duke did not look at her, but his knee, beneath the cloth of the table, came briefly to rest against hers. It was past midnight when they were finally in the carriage. Only then did the Duke draw the note from his coat and place it, unopened, in her hand. Read it now, if you will. I would rather you did not read it alone. She broke the seal. Miss Aldercroft, I write to congratulate you upon your engagement and to offer a small private observation. The Duke of Halverthorne has, in the past 5 years, been engaged twice before. Neither engagement was announced in the papers. Neither lady was permitted to live to the wedding. I am, as ever, the Duke's most faithful friend, and yours. And St. Marivin read it twice. She read it a third time, and she understood 3 things in succession. She understood that it was a lie. She understood that it was a lie designed to make her doubt, not to make her certain. And she understood that whoever Ashbel Crane was, he had been waiting for her, specifically her, for considerably longer than the past 2 days. She handed it back to the Duke. He glanced at it and went very still. It is not true, of course. It isn't true. I have never been engaged before in my life. I know. You cannot know. We are barely acquainted. I know, because if you had buried 2 affianced wives, Your Grace, you would not have asked me a question yesterday morning. You would have assumed. You did not assume. You asked. Men who have done it before do not ask. The Duke sat in the dim, swaying carriage with a forged accusation of murder in his hand, and he looked at her as though no one had ever, in his 35 years, simply chosen to believe him. The carriage turned into Cavendish Square. He will try again. Worse than this. I know. I cannot promise you he will not succeed. I know that also. Then why are you not afraid? She thought of 6 years of being walked through. Because for the first time in a long while, Your Grace, I am being seen, and I would rather be seen and in danger than safe and invisible. The carriage stopped. He did not move to open the door. He did not look away. Miss Aldercroft. Marivin. It was the first time he had used her given name. It was not, she would understand later, the last. The cards came in the morning. Small cream rectangles bearing names she did not know, each one offering some small, artful courtesy that sat on the page like a pin disguised as a flower. Miss Aldercroft. We have not been introduced, but I had the honor of being a near friend to His Grace's late mother, and I confess I have been wondering whether you are aware of the particular sorrow that haunts the family. Miss Aldercroft. There is a portrait in the long gallery at Halverthorne House, which his late brother painted of a young woman the family does not now name. Miss Aldercroft. Pray do not believe everything you are told of the night 5 years ago. There were 2 coffins, not one. She read them in her bedroom with the door locked. She had read perhaps a dozen when she stopped, and understood that this was the way Crane intended to do it. He was not going to attempt her life. He was going to attempt her certainty. He was going to introduce, in very small dosages, the question that had haunted the Duke for 5 years, and he was going to wait for the question to do his work for him. She gathered the cards. She tied them in a black ribbon and locked them in the bottom drawer of her writing desk. The Duke arrived at 11:30. Marivin received him alone. He looked, for the first time, slightly less exhausted. He had slept, perhaps 3 hours. In him, it was a transformation. You have received cards. 11 by 10:30 this morning. There are more. May I see them? She brought him the bundle. He sat in the chair by the window and untied the ribbon. She watched the precise moment the composure cracked, the moment the man beneath the marble showed for just an instant before he sealed it over again. It happened at the 3rd card. He read the rest. He retied the ribbon. Sit, please. I have to tell you something I have told no one in 5 years. She sat. He did not look at her. He looked at his own hands. My brother did not die of a fever. I told the world he died of a fever. I told my sister, who was 16 at the time. I told my mother, who outlived him by 2 years, and never quite believed me. It was a lie I have maintained for 5 years, because the truth would have damaged my brother's name, my sister's prospects, and my mother's last years of happiness. But you are receiving cards which suggest that someone besides myself knows what happened. Yes, my brother took his own life. He did so by hanging in the long gallery at Halverthorne House, 2 hours before a dinner at which we were to announce his betrothal to a young woman named Selma Penwraith, who was the only daughter of a country baronet, who was 19 years old, and whom my brother had ruined. He was 22, and he was reckless, and he loved her. When she discovered, in early September, that she was carrying a child, my brother went to my father and asked for permission to marry her. My father refused. There was an alliance with the Duchess of Carromore's only daughter that he had been arranging for 3 years. He told my brother that the matter would be managed, by which he meant that the young woman would be paid and removed and forgotten. My brother did not find this an acceptable solution. I was 30 at the time. I was in Vienna on diplomatic business. I returned the morning after, summoned by an express. I cut my brother down myself. He stopped. Miss Penwraith. Miss Penwraith was sent to a cousin in Yorkshire. Her child was born in February. The child lived 3 weeks. Miss Penwraith took her own life 11 days after the child was buried. Her father wrote to me. I attended her funeral. I was the only mourner from London. My father did not know I had gone. He died 2 years later, and I did not, when I followed him to the grave, weep for him. That is what Crane knows. He was my brother's closest friend. The cards you are receiving are the first weapon he has chosen to use. They will not be the last. He will sooner or later attempt to publish. When he does, my sister, who is now 23 and recently married to a clergyman in Hampshire, will read in the papers that her brother was a suicide and a seducer. He stopped again. That is what I am. A man who buried his brother in a lie. Marivin did not speak for a long moment. She rose. She crossed to where he sat. She did not touch him. She stood in front of him, and she waited until he raised his eyes to her face. Theodric. He inhaled as though he had been struck. Theodric, you did not bury your brother in a lie. You buried your brother in a kindness. The lie was your father's. The choice to maintain the kindness was yours. They are not the same thing. He could not speak. He reached up very slowly, and he took her hand. He did not press it to his lips. He simply held it in both of his, as though it were an object that might at any moment be taken from him. And he bowed his head over it. And Marivin Aldercroft stood in her stepmother's green drawing room with the coldest duke in London, weeping silently into her ungloved fingers. He did not weep aloud. He did not shake. There was only the slow heat of tears against the back of her hand. She did not pull her hand away. She did not speak. When at last he raised his head, his eyes were dry. His face was composed. But it was not the composure of marble. It was the composure of a man who had set down a weight he had been carrying alone for 5 years. Marivin, forgive me for making you the keeper of this. It is not your burden. I'm keeping it because I choose to keep it. Do not insult me by suggesting otherwise. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth did the thing it had done the night before. Yes, of course. He rose. He retained her hand a moment longer. Then he released it and bowed. I shall see you tomorrow. There is a matter I should like to put to you. I shall not reconsider. Then tomorrow, when you have not reconsidered, I shall put my matter to you." He left. She stood in the empty drawing room with her hand still warm where his tears had fallen, and she understood that the coldest duke in London was not cold at all, and that the only person in the city to whom this fact was now known was herself. It was not a thing she would have surrendered for any sum on earth. Lady Carradine's ball was, by the unanimous judgment of London's most experienced campaigners, the third great battlefield of the season. By Thursday morning, the wagers at White's stood at 3-1 that Crane would attend. "You are amused by this," Merivale said. "I am steadied by it. I should very much like this evening to teach them better manners." By doing what? By being, for the first time in 5 years, a man who is visibly happy in a ballroom. Theodric, you cannot. I can. Crane will be there tonight. He believes that if he can maneuver me into a corner of that ballroom and provoke me into a single moment of public coldness toward you, he will have demonstrated to all of London that this engagement is a fiction. I propose to demonstrate the opposite. You are asking me to perform an affection that we do not feel. I am asking you to perform the affection that we are not yet permitted to name. There is a distinction." She did not look up at him, because if she had, she did not trust what her face would have done. "I shall help you." The success of it depended upon Merivale's ability to act as though she had been waiting 6 years to be looked at by Lord Corvin Halverthorne, in precisely the way Lord Corvin Halverthorne intended, this evening, to look at her. The difficulty, she did not say aloud, was that she had not been waiting 6 years. She had been waiting 6 days. The gown she wore that night was of the deepest forest green silk, delivered that afternoon from a Bond Street modiste with whom Merivale had never had an account, accompanied by a note in the Duke's hand. "I shall be greatly obliged if you will wear this." "T.Y." He arrived to collect her at 9:30. He kissed her gloved knuckles and murmured, so that only she could hear, "I am terrified, Miss Aldercroft. Be kind to me." "I shall not be kind. I shall be magnificent. Kindness is for breakfast." The corner of his mouth did the thing. The ballroom at Lady Carradine's house in Hanover Square was so vast that it had been built around an indoor fountain. The fountain ran, the candles burned, and the entire of London turned at 9:45 to watch them enter. The Duke walked beside her. He walked, in fact, fractionally behind her, like a man who had decided that the woman on his arm was the more important person in the room. He inclined his head to Lady Carradine. He did not, in the first quarter hour, look at any other woman in the room except his betrothed, and he looked at her in a way which Lady Stanwick would describe in a letter the next morning as the look of a man who has come in from a long winter and discovered, on his own hearth, a fire he did not light. The Duke asked her, at 10:20, to dance the second waltz. When his hand came to rest at her waist, he did not hold it at the polite distance of a hovering bird. He let it rest with the full, deliberate weight of a man who was no longer pretending. "Theodric," she breathed. "Merivale. I cannot tell, any more, what the play is and what is not. Neither can I. I have stopped trying to know." She missed her step. He caught her, smoothly. It was at the third turn that she saw Crane. He was standing beside the fountain, a glass of champagne in his hand. He had her brother's old coloring, fair hair and a long, thin face, and a mouth that had the trick of seeming to smile at something just behind the person it was addressing. He raised his glass to her as the waltz turned them past him in the smallest possible salute. She did not look away. She let her hand, the gloved hand resting on the Duke's shoulder, slide upward by perhaps half an inch until it rested at the back of his neck. The gesture was, in the language of the ballroom, scandalous. It was the gesture of a wife. The Duke's breath caught against her temple. Merivyn. I see him. I should like very much, Theodric, for him to understand that I have seen him, and that I have not been afraid for 1 second, and that you and I are not, in any sense, which he is capable of understanding, alone. Then we shall make him understand. He stopped dancing. He stopped in the center of Lady Carradine's ballroom in the middle of a waltz, with 200 people watching, and he raised her hand to his lips, and he kissed the back of her glove. He did not do it briefly. He did it slowly, with his eyes closed. The orchestra, after a moment of confused hesitation, played on around them. Half the room gasped audibly. Crane lowered his glass. Merivyn, watching for it, saw the smile leave his eyes the way a candle leaves a window. He inclined his head to her, the smallest possible bow. Then he set down his glass on the rim of the fountain, turned, and walked out of the ballroom. It was nearly an hour later, in the small antechamber to which she had retreated under the pretext of repairing her hem, that she heard the door close softly behind her, and turned to find Ashbel Crane standing with his back against it, and the key in his hand. Miss Aldercroft, we have, I think, a great deal to discuss. Merivyn did not run for the door. She did not call out. She turned very slightly so that she was facing him fully, and so that her left hand was free. Mr. Crane, I do not believe we have been introduced. We have not. Ashbel Crane, at your service. I had the honor, some years ago, of being closest friend to the late Lord Edmund Halverthorne. I'm aware of the brother. Are you? I'm also aware that the door behind you is locked, that there are at least 200 persons within earshot, and that the bell pull beside the writing desk is within my reach. Should you remain here longer than the next 2 minutes, I shall use it. I should advise you to have prepared an explanation that satisfies Lady Carradine, whose patience for scandal in her own house is, I am told, limited. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. I had been told you were formidable. I had not been told you were quite so direct. 2 minutes. Then I shall be brief. I have come to tell you that the man you have engaged yourself to is not the man you believe him to be. There is a portrait in the long gallery at Halverthorne House, which his late brother painted of a young woman named Iselma Penreath. That young woman is buried in a grave in Yorkshire, which his Grace visits twice a year, and her child, who was the late Lord Edmund's child, lies in the same grave. The man who bears the responsibility for managing those deaths, for burying them in lies, is the man whom you have agreed, before all of London, to marry. He stopped. He waited. He had expected that she would gasp, that she would weep. She did none of these things. Mr. Crane, how long have you been waiting to deliver that speech? He blinked. It is, I must say, a very polished piece of work. I should imagine you have practiced it before a glass. You do not believe me. On the contrary, I believe almost every word of what you have told me. I have known almost every word of it for 2 days. His Grace told me himself on Tuesday morning. He told me without flinching. He did not, Mr. Crane, send you ahead of him to soften the blow. The smile did not leave his face, but something behind it shifted. He told you, all of it. All of it, including his attendance at Miss Penreath's funeral, including the 11 days between her child's burial and her own. There is nothing now that you can publish about Lord Corvin Halverthorne, which I will not already have known of for longer than the printer who sets the type. You think his confession has bought him your loyalty. His confession bought him my respect. My loyalty he bought with something else, which is not your concern. He has used you. He attached himself to you publicly because he required a shield. He is not a victim. He is a strategist. And you have been moved, deliberately, to a square upon his board, which he requires you to occupy." She listened. "Mr. Crane, you are quite correct. He has used me as a shield. He has done all of this with my full understanding, and he asked my permission for each of it. The difference between you and His Grace is not that he is a strategist, and you are not. You are both strategists. The difference is that he asked. You did not. I find I prefer the strategist who asks. I shall now ring the bell." She moved. He moved faster. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and his hand closed around her wrist, not gently, before she could reach the bell pull, and he held her there with his face close to hers. "Listen to me, you stupid little girl." The door burst open. The lock gave way with the splintering of pine, and the Duke of Halverthorne came through it with a force that suggested the door had been struck by a man who had been listening, with considerable attention, to a great many of the preceding sentences. Crane released her wrist. He was a fraction of a second too slow. The Duke hit him. He hit him with a closed fist in the center of the face, with a precision that suggested he had not entirely forgotten the boxing he had learned at school. Crane went down hard, against the writing desk, and the writing desk went down with him, and the small porcelain inkwell shattered, and the ink ran across the carpet in a slow black fan. The Duke did not look at him. He looked at Marivin. "Are you hurt?" "No." He laid his hand upon you. "He took my wrist. He did not strike me." "Show me." She extended her wrist. He took her hand in both of his, and he turned the glove back at the cuff, and he looked at the skin beneath. It was reddening. He bent his head, and he pressed his lips, very lightly, to the place where the marks would form. Behind them, in the corridor, footsteps were beginning. Lady Carradine's voice, sharp and astonished. "Marivin. Theodric. I am going to kill him." "You are not. He is unconscious. He will be ruined when he wakes. You did it the moment your fist met his nose. He has reached for a woman publicly engaged, in a private room with the door locked, in front of many witnesses. You have not lost the engagement. He has lost the war. Do not, Theodric, hang for him." He looked at her for a long moment. She watched the rage leave his eyes the way a tide leaves a shore. "Yes, you are correct. Step back from him. You are going to inform Lady Carradine, in the politest possible terms, that Mr. Crane has regrettably suffered a fall. We are leaving." The Duke informed Lady Carradine, in a voice of glassy composure, that Mr. Crane had regrettably suffered a fall. Lady Carradine, who had not built her position in society without the ability to recognize a useful lie when it was offered to her at midnight, said only, "Indeed, Your Grace. I shall send for a footman." In the carriage, the Duke did not speak for nearly 2 miles. When at last he did, his voice was very quiet. "He hurt you. He bruised me. He did not hurt me. There is a distinction I should not have allowed. I shall not ever again be slower to your defense than you are to mine." She did not answer for a long moment. Then, very softly, "Theodric, why did you tell me on Tuesday that you were not the man I believed you to be?" "Because I believed it. And tonight—" He was silent for a long time. "Tonight I have come to suspect that I may have been mistaken about myself for some considerable time." She did not press him. She had, in the splintering of a door, learned everything she required to know. The carriage rolled on through the dark streets, and Marivin Aldercroft and the Duke of Halverthorne sat in silence, side by side, not touching, not speaking, and entirely no longer alone. There is a particular hour in a London night, between the calling of the watchman and the first creaking of the cart wheels at the markets, in which the city becomes briefly quiet enough that a person standing alone at a window may hear, beneath the ordinary murmur of a great place, the smaller sound of their own breathing. Marivin heard it for the first time at 3:30, on the morning after Lady Carradine's ball. She had not slept. She had bathed, let her maid take down her hair, and now sat at the writing desk in her nightgown and shawl. She thought of the splintered door. She thought of the Duke's mouth against the underside of her wrist. She rose. She drew back the curtain. The square below was empty. A single carriage stood at the curb on the far side of the iron railings, the lamps lit, the horses standing very still in the cold. There was no reason for any carriage to be standing at 3 a.m. in Cavendish Square. Then the door of the carriage opened, and the Duke stepped down into the lamplight. He did not look up at her window. He stood in the cold, in his greatcoat, with no hat, and he looked across the empty railings at the dark front of her stepmother's house. He had not, she understood, intended to come to the door. He had simply not been able to remain, this night, in his own house. She did not stop to consider. She drew her shawl closer. She left the bedroom in her bare feet, went down the back stairs in the dark, through the green baize door into the cold, flagged kitchen, down the area steps, and out at the basement door, which the cook left unbolted in the small hours, so that the milk girl could come in at 5. He saw her before she had reached the gate. He did not move. She crossed the pavement to him, in her nightgown and her shawl, in her bare feet on the cold stones, with her hair loose down her back. "Theodric, what are you doing?" "I do not know." "How long have you been here?" "I do not know that either." He was a man of 35 in a greatcoat in the small hours of a March morning, and he had not slept, and he was looking at her as though she were the only thing in the city he could quite remember the name of. "Come inside. The cook leaves the area door open at 3. There's a small room beside the kitchen which my father used as a study. It has a fire that is banked, but not out." He nodded. She led him through the unbolted door, past the dark kitchen, into the small, low-ceilinged room that had been her father's. She knelt and lifted the ash with the poker. The fire bloomed. "Theodric, take it off. You're shaking." He took off his coat. He sat in her father's chair. She sat opposite, and she waited. She had learned that he would, if she waited long enough, find his own way into speech. "I have been thinking all night about what I am to ask you in the morning. I had prepared a great many sentences. I find that I cannot, here, remember any of them. May I tell you instead what I hadn't prepared to say? Please. On Tuesday, I told you I had not been kind to anyone in 5 years. I have spent the last 72 hours discovering that I was wrong. I told myself I had failed at love once, with my own brother, and that I had no business at it again. Marivan, I have failed at this also. I have failed at it astonishingly. I have failed at it with such completeness that I no longer remember when it began. Theodric, I am telling you because I have spent my adult life refusing to tell anyone anything. I love you, Marivan Aldercroft. I have loved you, I think, since you said please. I shall continue to love you, whether you choose to remain my affianced wife at the end of this season, or whether you choose to dissolve our engagement. I am telling you because I should rather you know it once and refuse it than not know it, and live the rest of your life believing that the man who came to your stepmother's drawing room on Tuesday morning was the man he claimed to be. He was not. The fire crackled. Marivan rose. She crossed to him. She knelt in her nightgown on the rug at his feet, and she took both of his cold hands in both of hers. Theodric, look at me. On the night of the Pemberley ball, you said no one says please to me. I said that is perhaps why you bleed alone. I have wondered ever since whether I did, in fact, wound you. You did. I am sorry. Do not be. It was the truest thing that had been said to me in 5 years. She lifted his hands. She pressed them to her face, both of them, and she closed her eyes. I do not require you to step back. I require you to tell me again, and tomorrow. and the morning after. I have loved you, I think, since you sat in that chair and told me to lead the way. I did not know it then. I have been working it out slowly since. I do not know what we shall do about it, but I know that I am not, at this hour, prepared to lie to you about what I feel, because you have not lied to me, and I shall not be outdone by you, Theodric, in any matter. He laughed. He drew her up to him. He drew her into the chair, into his lap, into the circle of his arms, and she went, in her nightgown, with her shawl trailing on the floor, and she put her arms around his neck. He kissed her hair. He kissed her temple. He turned her face up to his, and he kissed her mouth, slowly, with such restraint that she understood at once that he was holding himself in check, by an act of considerable will, not permitting himself to ask her for anything she had not already, freely, offered. She kissed him back. She did not hold herself in check at all. It was, she would think afterward, the moment in which the engagement became real. Not the announcement in the Morning Post. Not the dinner at the Earl of Sennock's. Not the waltz at Lady Carradine's ball. The moment in which it became real was the moment in which the Duke allowed himself to be kissed, in his shirt sleeves, by a woman in her nightgown, who had decided, irrevocably, that he was hers. He held her, for perhaps a quarter of an hour. He told her about the long gallery at Halverthorne House. He told her about his sister in Hampshire. He told her about the small dog his mother had kept. He left her at 4:45. He told her he loved her. He told her he intended to continue telling her at intervals for the remainder of his life. She watched him climb into the unmarked carriage. She climbed back to her bedroom in the cold stone dawn, and she slept for the first true sleep she had slept in nearly a fortnight. She did not yet know that she would not see him again at 11. She did not yet know that the Morning Post would bring 3 things into the house in Cavendish Square: a letter from the Duchess of Carrowmore, a letter from the Duke, written at 6 in the morning, and at the bottom of the salver, a small folded handbill, fresh from a press in Holborn, smelling still faintly of ink, bearing the title, A True Account of the Death of Lord Edmund Halverthorne, signed at the foot, in a hand she now knew, a Crane. The world, while she slept, had begun to burn. She did not read the handbill first. She read his letter first. Marivin, by the time you read this, the morning will have begun, and I shall be on the road to Hampshire. Crane has done what we feared he would do. The handbill was struck overnight at a press in Holborn, and is being distributed at this hour throughout the clubs and to 100 private addresses. My sister will, by tomorrow, have read in the papers of her own county that her brother was a suicide and a seducer. I cannot, in conscience, allow her to learn it from print. I am going to her now. I shall be back in London on Friday. Forgive me. I love you. I shall return. T. She read it twice. Then she read the handbill. It was 8 pages. Crane had not lied. He had told the truth in such a way that the truth, in his telling, became something monstrous. And in his final 2 pages, he had set out an account of the Duke's recent engagement to a Miss Marivin Aldercroft of Cavendish Square, which engagement, he wrote, appears upon close inquiry to have been arranged with great haste in the immediate aftermath of an attack upon the Duke's person at the Pemberley ball, the circumstances of which Miss Aldercroft has been pleased to render herself a public participant in concealing. He had joined her name to it. He had joined it cleverly. He had joined it without a single accusation that could be answered by libel. Marivin sat at the breakfast table with the handbill before her, and her stepmother in the chair opposite, weeping with a violence that suggested the matter had become considerably more her own concern than her stepdaughter's, and she understood that she was, by 10 in the morning, the most discussed woman in London. The bell at the front door began to ring. It did not stop. Marvin received none of them. She sat in the green drawing room with the door locked, and she wrote 3 letters, and she did not weep. The first letter was to her brother Augustus, who was at Cambridge. She told him the truth. The second letter was to her father's old solicitor, Mr. Padworth, in Lincoln's Inn. She asked him to call upon her at 4 that afternoon. The third letter she did not send. She wrote it. She folded it. She placed it in the drawer of her writing desk. It was addressed to the Duke of Halverthorne. Theodoric, do not, when you return, mistake what I shall do in the next 24 hours for any failure of love. She locked the drawer. She summoned her maid. She instructed her maid to pack 1 small trunk with her plainest gowns, her writing case, her father's miniature, and the locket containing her mother's hair. The maid asked no questions. At 3, Marvin left the house in Cavendish Square by the back area door. She wore her plainest cloak, with the hood drawn up. She walked to the corner of Wigmore Street, where she engaged a hackney, and she gave the driver the direction of the Bull and Mouth coaching inn at St. Martin's-le-Grand. She purchased, from a clerk who did not know her, a single inside seat upon the 4 o'clock mail coach to Bath in the name of Miss Marian Alder. The coach rolled out of the yard at 4 precisely. She closed the curtain. She closed her eyes. The coach rolled on through the deepening dusk, and Marvin Aldercroft, with 1 small trunk at her feet and a folded handbill smelling faintly of fresh ink in the bottom of her reticule, vanished from London. Behind her, in Cavendish Square, the bell at the front door of her stepmother's house was still ringing. It would ring, off and on, for the next 3 days. No one would answer it. The first letter from Marvin reached Halverthorne House at 2:30 on the Friday afternoon. The Duke had returned from Hampshire 2 hours earlier. He had not slept since Wednesday night. He had ridden into the stable yard at noon and walked into his own house to discover that his betrothed had, on Wednesday evening, vanished. There had been, in every coffee-house and in every club in London, the slow rising tide of a story that had, by Friday morning, begun to take the only shape such stories ever took, which was that Miss Aldercroft, having read the handbill, had fled. The Duke read the letter at his writing desk, standing. Theodoric, by the time you read this, I shall be in Bath, in lodgings taken in the name of Miss Marian Alder. The address is at the foot of this letter. You will not come for me. I require you to read this twice before you do anything in answer to it. Crane will not be finished until he has provoked a response from one of us that ruins both. I have understood that the only response he cannot use against you is my absence. He cannot harm you through me if he cannot find me. He cannot drag your name through a public defense of mine if there is no public defense to be made. I have therefore removed myself. I am perfectly safe. I have written to Mr. Padworth, who knows where I am, and who will, on receipt of my next letter, take certain steps with regard to the small estate my father left me, the income from which is now sufficient, since I came of age last September, to support me. You will, in London, do what only you can do. You will retain the most disagreeable libel counsel in the Inns of Court, and you will sue Crane for every printed sentence in his handbill that touches upon yourself. You will not sue him on my behalf. You will leave my reputation, in this fortnight, in my own hands. Do this for a fortnight. At the end of the fortnight, you may come to Bath. You may not come before. If you come before, I shall not see you. I love you. I told you I would tell you again. I am, as it happens, in considerable misery without you. I am, also, perfectly willing to remain in considerable misery for a fortnight, because the alternative is to be rescued by a man I love into a ruin neither of us would survive. Trust me. Do the work. Come to me on the 27th. The Duke read the letter standing. Then he read it again, sitting. Then he laughed. It was not a laugh anyone in his household had heard in 5 years. He took out a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote in his sharp, economical hand a single sentence: Merivyn. I have read it twice. I shall do as you ask. T. He gave it to a courier, with instructions to ride through the night. Then he ordered his man to lay out his most formal coat. He had just enough time before nightfall to call upon the senior partner of the firm in Lincoln's Inn that handled the libel suits of the late Lord Chancellor's grandson, and to put before that partner the case of Halverthorne against Crane. By 6 in the evening, a writ had been drawn, sealed, and dispatched. By 7, it had been served upon Mr. Crane at his lodgings in Albany. By 8, the news had reached 3 of the clubs in St. James's, and by 10, it had reached all of them. By the time the Duke walked out of White's, the consensus in the room behind him was that the writ had not been served by a man who was guilty. By the morning after, when the second handbill from Crane appeared, the consensus had hardened into something close to public opinion. The second handbill was read with interest, but it was not, this time, believed. It was not believed because the Duke had, for 48 hours, been observed by half of London behaving like a man who had nothing to hide. It was also not believed because by Sunday morning, 3 things had happened that Crane had not anticipated. The first was that Mr. Padworth had presented himself at the Morning Post on Saturday afternoon with a signed statement from his client, given before 2 witnesses in Bath, in which Miss Aldercroft confirmed her engagement to the Duke, denied each of the specific implications made against her in the handbill, and announced her intention to return to London on the 27th. The second was that the Duke's sister, Lady Hester Beaumont, who had not been in London for 2 years, arrived at Halverthorne House on Saturday evening with her husband and her trunk, and announced that she would be remaining in London until the action against Mr. Crane had been disposed of. She received a great many callers on Sunday afternoon. She was charming, composed, and entirely candid about the death of her brother 5 years ago. The third was that, on Sunday morning, a small notice appeared in the Gazette, signed by 23 persons of considerable rank and respectability, expressing their continued confidence in the character of the Duke. By Monday evening, the writ had been answered by Crane's counsel with a request for delay. By Tuesday, the request had been refused. By Wednesday, Crane's counsel had withdrawn from the case. By Thursday, Mr. Crane had been observed boarding the Dover packet and was widely understood to have left for the continent. The Duke received the news at his breakfast table on Friday morning. He counted forward to the 27th. There were 5 days remaining. He went upstairs and ordered his valet to pack a small trunk. He had been instructed not to come to Bath before the 27th. He had not been instructed not to be in Bath in lodgings of his own on the 26th. Merivyn was sitting in the garden of her lodgings in Bath at 3:20 on the afternoon of the 27th when she heard the gate open behind her. She did not turn at once. The late March sun was warm on her shoulders. The small white dog that belonged to her landlady was asleep across her feet, and she had heard the bells of the Abbey ring the quarter hour 2 minutes earlier. The gate clicked shut. The footsteps were the footsteps of a man who had ridden 90 miles and was, with considerable discipline, walking the last 20 paces toward her at the pace of a gentleman calling upon a lady, because he had given his word. The footsteps stopped 2 paces behind her chair. Merivyn. Theodoric. I am, as it happens, a day early. I had calculated at most half a day. You have done better than I expected. I left at 4 this morning. I changed horses 3 times. I have been in Bath since 1. I took lodgings at the White Hart, where I have done nothing for 2 hours and a quarter, except wait for the Abbey clock to strike a respectable hour. She rose. She turned. He looked, she thought, almost as exhausted as he had on the morning he had come to her stepmother's drawing room 12 days ago. But there was something different in his face. and it took her a long moment to understand what it was. He was not afraid. She had not seen him ever when he was not afraid. She had not understood that the cold composure she had taken for indifference, and then for grief, and then for armored weariness, had been, beneath all of them, a particular and very old fear. He had carried it so long he had forgotten he was carrying it. Theodric, you are not afraid. No. When did you stop? I do not know exactly. Some part of it left me on Wednesday night in your father's study. Some part of it left me on Friday afternoon when I read your letter. The last of it left me, I think, this morning at 4 on the road, when I understood that I was riding toward you and that you would, when I arrived, still be here. Sit. You are about to fall over. I'm not going to fall over. Sit, Theodric. He sat. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at her with such steadiness that the last of her own composure, which had carried her through 12 days of pretending in Bath that she was a woman named Marian Alder, gave way at last. She knelt. She knelt on the grass at his feet, exactly as she had knelt on her father's study rug at 3:30 in the morning, and she took both of his hands in both of hers. Theodric, did you do as I asked? All of it. All of it. You did not come to Bath before the 26th. I was in Bath on the 26th. I was not in this garden until the 27th. You did not, if I may observe it, specify the geography. You specified the day. She laughed. She had not laughed in 12 days. Theodric Halverthorne, you are an exact man. In matters concerning you, a very exact man. And Crane. On the continent, disgraced, sued, withdrawn. He is not my concern any longer. Your sister, in London, in my house. She has, I am instructed to tell you, decided in advance that she loves you, and she is unwilling to be persuaded to revise the opinion. I shall do my best to deserve it. Mariven. Theodric. I have a thing to ask you. It is not a clever question. I wish to ask you in the way a man asks a woman a question, when he loves her, and when he intends, if she answers correctly, to spend the remainder of his life arranging his affairs so that she is permitted to discover that he has not stopped loving her, ever, on any day, for any reason. Theodric. Mariven Aldercroft, will you in fact marry me? The garden was very quiet. A blackbird in the laburnum on the wall sang 2 notes and stopped. The small white dog turned in a circle and laid down across both of their feet. Yes. You did not require me to argue for it. I did not. You may save your arguments. You may present them to me at intervals over the course of our marriage. He raised her hands. He pressed them, both of them, against his face, and he held them there. And Mariven knelt in the grass in a small Bath garden in the late March sun, and watched the coldest duke in London weep, for the second time in their acquaintance, into the palms of her ungloved hands. When at last he raised his head, his eyes were dry. There is a thing I should ask your brother. Augustus is at Cambridge. He has informed me, by letter, that he intends to come down at the end of term and to call upon you in person. He is 20 years old, and he is the head of our family, and he will be answered honestly or not at all. I should advise you to prepare. I shall prepare. You shall do more than prepare. You shall take him seriously. He has, since our father died, been the only protection I have had. He was 16 when our father died. You will not condescend to him by virtue of being twice his age and a duke. It is understood. He drew her up. He settled her into the chair beside him, and he kept her hand in his, and they sat together for a long time, in silence, in the warm afternoon, with the small white dog asleep across their feet. Eventually she said, Theodric, my landlady is a widow of considerable propriety. She will not permit you under this roof past 9 in the evening. She will, however, permit you to dine here at 6. At 9, you will return to the White Hart. At 8 tomorrow morning, you will return here, and you will breakfast with me. At 10, we shall walk to the pump room, and we shall be observed walking. At noon, we shall return to London by post-chaise. We shall, by then, have given Bath nothing further to gossip about. We shall arrive at your sister's house in time for tea. It satisfies me extraordinarily." He raised her hand. He kissed the inside of her wrist, where, a fortnight earlier, Crane had bruised her, and where the bruise was now very nearly healed. "Marivin, you have, in this fortnight, run an action in Bath, which I should not have run as well in your place. You are, in matters of strategy, my superior. I am aware. I shall expect you to consult me before you undertake any further large decisions, particularly those involving locked doors, broken inkwells, and the fists of dukes. I shall consult you, Marivin, before I undertake any decision of any size, in any room, for the remainder of my life. That is acceptable. Begin tomorrow. Why not today? Because today, Theodoric, you are too tired to be consulted upon anything more demanding than the question of which chair you should remain in until dinner. I shall remain in this one. That is an acceptable decision." He laughed. It was the second laugh anyone had heard from him in 5 years, and only the small white dog, the blackbird, and Miss Marivin Aldercroft were there to hear it. They were married on the 7th of June in the parish church of the village of Wensley. Where Marivin's father lay buried under a stone, she had not been able, until that afternoon, to bring herself to read in full. The wedding was small. Lady Hester Beaumont stood as her sister-in-law and wept silently throughout the ceremony, in the way of a woman who had been waiting 5 years for a reason to weep that was not a sorrow. The Reverend Beaumont performed the ceremony. Augustus Aldercroft, who had on the previous Thursday in the library at Halverthorne House conducted an interrogation of his future brother-in-law that the Duke would later describe as the most uncomfortable hour of my life and the most useful one, gave his sister away. The Duke's father did not attend. He had been dead for 2 years. The Duke's mother did not attend. She had been dead for 4. The household at Halverthorne House attended in its entirety by order of the Duke, who had summoned his butler, his housekeeper, and his head groom into the library and informed them that he should take it personally if any of them declined. None of them declined. Augustus's 2 younger brothers attended. So did Mr. Padworth. So did the Earl of Senec. Lady Aldercroft did not attend. She had been, since the first week of April, taking the waters at Cheltenham, where she would remain for the better part of 18 months. By 4 in the afternoon, the bride and groom were alone in the drawing-room of Wensley Park, which the Duke had quietly bought back from the cousin who had been letting it fall into ruin. He had not told her until the morning of the wedding. He had walked her through the front door at 9:30 in her traveling dress, and he had said, "This is yours by deed of trust, in your name, regardless of the marriage. I bought it because I have understood, since the first night in your father's study, that you were a woman who had been parted from a house she loved, and that I was a man with the means to remedy it." She had wept then, briefly, and had ordered him out of the room so that she could weep in peace. She had married him at noon. By 4 they were alone, with the long windows open onto the green hills she remembered. "Theodoric, Marivin, I have a thing to say to you. It is not clever. I have been thinking about the night in the linen sitting room at Lady Pemberley's. I told you the truth. The truth was a thing you had not heard, in your own house for 5 years. Your servants did not say it to you. Your peers did not say it to you. And your father did not say it to you. Even your own brother, in the end, wasn't able to say it to you. I had no claim upon you. I told you the truth because I had been, For X years, a woman to whom the truth was never said, and because I had decided, that night, that I would no longer be the kind of woman who passed unspoken truths in silence. The truth is what you give to a person when you have nothing else. It is the most expensive thing one can give. I did not understand it before. I do now. She crossed to the window. He came. He stood behind her, and he put his arms around her, and he rested his chin upon the top of her head. "It is a very good house," he said. "It is. It will be. We shall keep it so." The long case clock in the hall struck the hour. Somewhere, a long way off, the bells of the parish church began to ring, because the verger had been instructed by the Reverend Beaumont, before the wedding party departed, that the bells were to ring at 5 and at 6 and at 7, in case the bride and groom were within hearing. The sound of bells pleased them. 3 years later, Marivin Halverthorne, Duchess of Halverthorne, stood in the long gallery at Halverthorne House in London, looking at a portrait she had not previously seen. It had been concealed, until that morning, behind a heavier and more recent landscape, in a small alcove at the far end of the gallery. The landscape had been moved at her own instruction. Behind it, an older painting had been revealed, hung at a height suggesting it had been placed there by a man who did not wish it to be looked at, and forgotten there by a man who did not, any more, remember which paintings he had hidden. The portrait was of a young woman in a pale blue dress, with hair the color of late wheat. She was perhaps 19. She was sitting in an orchard, with an apple on her lap, looking at someone just beyond the frame of the picture with the smallest possible smile. The signature in the lower right corner read, E. Halverthorne, 1812. The Duchess stood in front of the portrait for a long time. When at last her husband joined her, half an hour later, he stopped 4 paces behind her and did not speak. She did not turn. "Theodric, this is his Selma Penwreath." Yes, he loved her. He painted her as she was. He painted her happy. He did. I should like to keep this portrait. I should like to hang it in the small sitting room above the south stair. I should like our children, when they come, to grow up knowing that their father had a brother who could paint, and who loved a girl in an orchard. I should like the painting to be looked at. I should like it to be named. Will you permit it? He came to stand beside her. It was a long moment before he could speak. Yes, I shall require it. I have not been able, in 8 years, to look at this painting without being rendered useless. I find today that I can. I had not understood. I had been waiting for someone to ask. You will write to her father in Yorkshire. You will tell him that the painting hangs in our house, and that any member of his family who wishes to come and see it will be welcomed. I will. You will visit the small grave in October, and you will lay flowers there in your brother's name, and you will, this October, take me with you. I shall. He lifted her hand. He kissed it on the inside of her wrist, where Crane had bruised it 3 years and 4 months earlier, and where there was, of course, nothing now to see. Marivin, I love you. I know. I tell you, because I told you. I should always tell you. You haven't in 3 years missed a morning. You may continue. He laughed. Down the long gallery, in the great hall, the bells of the front door rang. It was the hour at which Lady Hester Beaumont and the Reverend Beaumont and their 2 small children were expected for tea, and with them Augustus Aldercroft, who had taken his degree at Cambridge 2 years earlier and was now reading for the bar. The Duke and Duchess of Halverthorne stood in the long gallery in front of a small portrait of a young woman with an apple in an orchard, and they did not, for a moment longer, move. Then the Duchess turned, and she put her hand into her husband's, and she said, "Come. They will be wanting their tea. We have a great many people to be glad of, Theodric." "Yes. Lead the way, Marivin, as you did the first time." She led the way. In a corridor of a different house, 3 years and a few months earlier, on a March night neither of them would ever forget, a young woman had said please to a bleeding stranger, and the world, while neither of them was looking, had quietly begun to be remade. Thank you for staying with Theodric and Merivin until the very end. Their story did not begin with a storm. It did not begin with a trap. It began with a single quiet word, said by a young woman who had decided, at last, that she would no longer be the kind of person who passed unspoken truths in silence. And it ended in an orchard portrait, lit at evening, named at last, with bells ringing in the hall and tea being poured below stairs. If a single gentle word can change the coldest man in London, perhaps it can change a great deal more than that. If you have not subscribed, please do, and ring the bell, because more stories are waiting. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories are told.